whether that's the pro wrestling world or the mental health world. And All Elite Wrestling, AEW, literally just came out last year with this 7-8 minute mental health video where it showed a lot of the wrestlers like Eddie Guerrero's widow Vicky and a lot of other people coming out with their struggles with mental health. And in pro wrestling, mental health is a very touchy subject because a lot of the wrestlers get a lot of crap from people on the internet. I see it every single day. I see what these guys go through, and they're people too, right? And I try to say that in a lot of interviews that I do with other podcasters is that, you guys, you heckle them and you say all these nasty things, but you don't know really what they're going through, because really they're just on TV and they're taking bumps for a living, and it's a painful job, very painful job. We've seen a lot of tragedy in the business over mental health, and I'm not going to get too into the tragedies and stuff, but like you look at what happened in 2007 with Chris Benoit, and you look at what happened with him. A lot of people I see on Twitter, they'll go on there and go, oh, F him, screw him, for what he did. And you've actually interviewed him a couple times, and your interviews with him were fantastic. But you couldn't tell maybe he was going through something, right, that no one else knew. And we find out later, okay, yes, he looked like this in the interview and he looked like this in the ring, but then you see truly what happened afterward and you go, man, like, could this have been prevented? If the mental health stigma would have, been erased in 2007, because it was still pretty prominent back then. If it was still erased back then, would this tragedy have been prevented? Would he still be here with us today?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I don't have an answer for it, but I have my feeling at the time when I interviewed him a few times. He kept calling me sir, and I kept saying, Chris, why are you calling me sir? And he respect. And I said, don't call me sir, call me Michael, call me Landsberg, call me ML, call me anything you want, but don't call me sir.
Yeah.
And he actually, not as a joke, went moments later, yes, sir.
Yeah.
And I felt like he was a difficult guy to connect with. I felt like that there was something between us that prevented, real communication. And, from him, I felt like he was locked off, blocked off. And as a result, I remember saying afterwards, I had no idea. I never thought this could be, mental illness. I remember saying to the guys that I knew, like Jeff Merrick, who helped me with all those interviews. I said, Jeff, Chris, and he was buddies with Chris. I said, he's just a really unusual guy. Which isn't an insult.
Right.
He was just an unusual guy. And if someone would have gone to him and said, Chris, you're walking the edge here, and you need to get help, right? I doubt he would have listened, because wrestling meant so much to him.
Yes.
He was a wrestler, and even though he took so many bumps and so many shots to the head, he should have quit, right?
Yes.
He should have quit wrestling. And I'm not revisiting this. It's kind of old news, but it's very possible someone should have told him, you got to quit wrestling. But he was so committed to it. That would have been a really hard sell.
Yeah, absolutely. And I only use him as an example because he's the biggest example from wrestling with mental illness. And like, you can look at the stuff with CTE and all that stuff, but really it makes me think too, it's like if he would have been in this era and he was wrestling right now, even with all the concussion protocol and whatever, he would have been forced to retire. But then that could have also been another hurdle for him too, right? Because like you said, he was so passionate to a fault. And I think that happens to a lot of even pro wrestlers, is when it's taken from them, like Bryan Danielson, for example, too. He was forced to retire in 2016. Granted, he's back now, but for that few years he was retired, you saw a downward spiral with him, where he was ready to give up until he eventually got cleared. But they told him in 2016, they said, Bryan, you have a 1% chance of wrestling again. And he couldn't accept that. And even though he did come back, not everybody can come back. And that's the one thing too that I wanted to mention in wrestling, is that up until like maybe 2 years ago, mental health wasn't really a big thing. And a lot of wrestlers get a lot of flack for that. They get a lot of flack for their actions outside the ring and stuff. But really, if it's somebody else doing another job, they don't get as much, right? Because they're not in the media and they're not as prominent on TV as, let's say, a Chris Benoit or a Bryan Danielson or guys like that. And that's not to ever excuse, his actions, because his actions are absolutely atrocious. But you can look at it too and be like, if he was suffering, and we know he was suffering because there's diaries and there's stuff like that. We know the information, but at the time, it always makes me wonder if mental health would have been as prominent as it is now and will be in the future. Could we have maybe helped him out? Could we have, maybe tried to steer him into another direction? Because I felt the same way too. Like I think about that with wrestling every day because it's all I've ever loved. I've loved pro wrestling since I was 3 years old. And when I got bullied and hazed in school and stuff, it was the one thing that kept me going. So it's like, I can't really imagine a life without it. So it's something too that I would have to accept, that if I was ever in that position where I start wrestling and they tell me, hey, you can't do this anymore, you're done. If something ever happens, I would have to accept that. And it would be a very emotionally unhealthy future for me. Like, for example, with Edge, when Edge retired in 2011, who you've also interviewed quite a few times too. And he's a great guy. And I wish that he didn't lose 10 years of his career, but really it did save his life. He even said, like, I had a very emotionally unhealthy time when I was forced to retire because this is all I ever knew. Right. And it's like, I wanted to correlate mental health into wrestling. And I want to do that when I get in the ring too. That's why I've done my best the last 4 or 5 years to try to build some kind of following. So when I get in the ring, you can also know me as the mental health wrestler. That's 100% fine with me. If that's what people label me as, and I never win a world title, but my goal was that I've helped pro wrestlers come out with their mental health and maybe save their jobs with their mental health, that would mean everything to me. And that's all based off of the genesis of Sick Not Weak, where you guys have really told me like, hey, it's okay to not be okay. And that's the quote too, but it's also a prominent quote that you guys use. And it's really meant a lot, not just to me, but I'm sure to a lot of other wrestlers, because I know there are other wrestlers too that follow Sick Not Weak, like Scott D'Amore, who lives in my city, who's the vice president.
Scott D'Amore was a guest on OTR many times.
Yeah.